Now, this subject of random walk is quite familiar to people dealing with algorithms of a particular type. They go by the name of randomized algorithms. These provide solutions to a class of problems which are called non-deterministic, in the sense that there are many different possibilities to explore. One doesn't have a priori idea about in which direction to proceed, and you basically do trial and error exploration, and that is done by choosing random processes. So, these probabilistic processes are described in terms of branched evolution trees, and different branches of the trees correspond to different possibilities. Mathematically, these problems are typically described using graphs where the vertices denote the various possible states and edges denote the evolutionary routes. These problems on a classical computer have to be dealt with only one branch at a time, and so when there are multiple branches, you use random numbers. Equivalently, you can call them coin tosses to explore one branch versus the other, and at the end of it, you want to get a complete solution to the problem. You might have to combine the results from different branches. So, a particular evolution corresponds to a specific walk, which will be called a random walk, and the final solution may be just average over these different random walks. So, this is a standard formulation of randomized algorithms, and they have been helpful in the computational context, because for certain problems it turns out that the randomized algorithms do a better job of finding the solution than the deterministic algorithms. And this was a surprise when it was discovered first, but now we understand the reasons behind it. Quantum computers provide a different route to explore these randomized processes, that in the sense of selecting various evolutionary branches one by one. You don't have to do that. You can explore multiple branches at the same time using a superposition principle, and you just have to be a little clever about how you are going to superpose various states, and then each one of them will produce a corresponding tree, and you can combine them in a clever way at the end to get a result. All the clever tricks are basically dependent on the geometry of the graph and what kind of superpositions you choose. It also turns out that many times having a coin is unnecessary in the process, provided you can construct a superposition, because you don't have to make any choices about which branches to select, one versus the other. Now, in language of physics, this problem is typically expressed in the language of diffusion. Essentially, random walks basically characterize a diffusion process. Diffusion is well known in various contexts in kinetic theory, and the most commonly used operator is the Laplacian operator in the equation. You can call it a diffusion equation, it's called also a heat equation, it's also a parabolic equation for evolution, and so on and so forth. The characteristic of that particular process is that a particular mode with a wave vector k diffuses with a corresponding energy which goes as proportional to k square. So, the diffusion equation is linear in time and quadratic in space, and that essentially produces this particular behavior. It is nothing but power counting. And well, this is in Fourier space, the derivatives are written in position space. And the time evolution typically depends as an exponential of the energy, which is characteristics of all physical processes, and the slowest developing processes are the one where the energy are the smallest, and that corresponds to the largest wavelength or the smallest value of k. And this relation boils down to a classical signature of Brownian process, Brownian motion, which says that the distance traveled by a random walk is proportional to square root of the time for which it has been traveling. It's nothing but the same relation returned after doing a Fourier transformation. Now, this is a very widely known results. It's based on simple power counting analysis, and lots of phenomena in statistical mechanics actually depend on this particular process. What happens in quantum mechanics is you can do something better than this. The reason is that you are not restricted to using this Laplacian operator, which is the standard classical operator, but you can use an alternative operator for evolution, and that operator was discovered by Dirac. It's typically denoted by this symbol with a gradient and a slash on it, and I will come to the explicit form of this operator later. That operator is linear in the space and time derivatives, so its corresponding signature is that the energy is proportional to momentum, or equivalently distance is proportional to time. This equation is, well, typically occurs in relativistic quantum mechanics, and we will see how to deal with it in more detail, but this particular signature is quite different than the classical signature. In particular, the walks travel quadratically faster over a region of space, provided you can make the dispersion relation behave like this, and that can be an advantage. So, here is the generic form of the Dirac operator. In addition to having this usual gradient, it introduces this additional structure. They are finite dimensional matrices, and Dirac actually took a very non-trivial step in converting the Laplacian to this particular operator. He wanted to take a square root, couldn't do it in any simplistic language, so he went one step further and just put in that extra degrees of freedom and took the square root with the help of particular properties of this matrices alpha and beta. They turn out to be anti-commuting structures, and physically it was very important because first they were introduced just as a mathematical requirement, but finally Dirac went ahead and predicted that these are not just artifacts of doing some clever mathematics, they must have physical meaning, and that brought in two important features into this whole analysis. This became an internal degrees of freedom, and they have now a interpretation which is experimentally well verified. These internal degrees of freedom correspond to a spin which just appears in as a part of the theory. Another degree of freedom which is buried also inside is the relation between a particle and antiparticle. That also appears automatically, and essentially that is a prediction of combining quantum mechanics with relativity, that these extra degree of freedoms appear, and of course experimentally they are well verified phenomena. So, you have to deal with these extra degrees of freedom. You may want to call these extra degrees of freedom as the coin, but it's actually a little different than the coin. I will come to that little later. The other thing which appears, and it has to do with the anti-commuting nature of this Matrices is these particles obeying Dirac equations describe actually fermions which obey exclusion principle. And these fermions have a little different implication as far as random walks are concerned, is they will produce walks which are automatically self-avoiding. Now, the self-avoidance property helps in making the diffusion faster because it doesn't like to come back to its starting point. Certain volume is excluded, it keeps on going outwards in a very simple manner. And if you want to imagine an example of that, it's actually most striking when you deal with one dimension. If you want to construct a walk which is self-avoiding in one dimension, that means that you cannot make a U-turn. You just have to start in one direction and keep on going, and it actually becomes a directed walk. There is nothing random about it. The question which comes, and which I don't have an answer, I don't think anybody else has an answer either, that this kind of strategy produces a square root speed up of algorithms. Now, this square root speed up is coming in Dirac equation from the change in the dispersion relation, which has to do with relativistic propagation. On the other hand, Grover's algorithm also produced a square root of speed up, which comes from constraint of unitarity. And physically, these two features are very different. Means unitarity is a completely different property than relativistic constraints, but they produce features which are basically behave the same way. And it turns out that both of these things are kind of optimal constraints for unstructured problems. Is there a relation between these two? Nobody knows. And the reason it is interesting is that you can construct theory which are relativistic but not unitary, and you can construct theory which are unitary but not relativistic, and they work fine. For example, general relativity classically can be formulated perfectly well, it is not unitary, and you can have non-relativistic quantum mechanics which have various kind of potentials which can be considered as action as a distance. They don't constrain, they are not constrained by relativistic propagation, and both of them so are independent principles. Why are they giving the same kind of predictions? We have one particular understanding which kind of says that these two are the principles which can be combined together in a barely compatible fashion, and when you do that, it produces a formulation of physics known as quantum field theory, where both of special relativity and unitary evolution appear together. And quantum field theory is a completely consistent formulation, but it's well known that if you try to stretch in either direction, going beyond relativity one way or the unitary or the other way, the whole formulation breaks apart. Why these things are mutually compatible in this particular limit is a question which maybe studies in quantum information might help to understand in future, but right now it's a mystery, and it's a connection which has appeared in several different studies also in trying to study Bell's inequalities and superluminary communication, how fast you can transform correlations from one place to another, and both principles are very much physical, and we don't have a deep understanding of a unifying structure combining both. So I will stick with the Dirac equation. Certain properties are useful for understanding the behavior of various mathematical expressions which appear, and they are connected with the symmetries, and one symmetry is rather obvious. It's a translational invariance which is almost there in most theories of physics. It may be discrete, it may be continuous, but it essentially connected to the kinetic part of the Hamiltonian. There is a discrete symmetry which also helps in this particular case it is connected with a charge conjugation or relation between particle and antiparticle, it implies that the eigenvalues of the Hamiltonian will always come in pairs. So, the full evolution will have the complex conjugation as a symmetry for various different paired eigenvalues. So, these things will appear later, I just want to mention to begin with. Now, in order to use this physical description on a computer, we have to discretize this equation. And discretization of this equation is kind of well known because it has been used for many years, but it also needs a certain kind of tricks, and they have to be kept in mind. What we need in essence is not the Hamiltonian which is discretized, but the unitary evolution operator also has to be discretized in the same way. You can't have a operator which is spread all over the place, that doesn't work. If you want to use as a computer instruction, it has to be located in a finite domain, and that kind of analysis has been done for the Dirac operator and used quite heavily in the subject which is known as a lattice gauge theory. Now, for people who start out understanding this for the first time, I want to give a little advice that there are lots of no-go theorems thrown out in the subject of trying to discretize the Dirac operator. They are not hurdles in the sense that they have as much value as the assumptions which underlie them, and if you modify the assumptions, you can bypass most of these theorems. If Dirac had assumed that I can't take this particular square root in a simple way, and so it will be a no-go theorem to write a linear operator, he would have gotten nowhere. He just assumed extra degrees of freedom, put in some non-commuting matrices and went ahead, and it gave a very much different but physically important formulation. So, here is one of the tricks. How do you take the square root in this matrix language? When you try to write a Laplacian operator in a discrete formulation in a nearest neighbor kind of coupling of the lattice, these are the coefficients which appear. These are -1 for one step in the negative direction, 2 for the present location, and -1 on the other direction. This thing can be rewritten in terms of matrices which have only +1 and -1, but they are kind of staggered in the sense that on the same line, this one has a one step backward, this other one has one step forward, and you can rewrite in this little blocks of 1, -1, -1 and 1. And the advantage of this thing is, if you rewrite the Hamiltonian in this particular fashion, you can do an exponential of this structure very trivially, because these are 2 by 2 matrices, you know how to write arbitrary exponential of it. So, the whole Hamiltonian can be written as 2 particular factors. There is certain price to pay, which is that this approximation is correct only up to order delta t square, but the fact is that both these individual factors are exactly unitary. And by doing that, you can exponentiate this particular matrices. The point is that this structure here describe the second derivative operator, while these things are going to describe first derivatives. It's just 1 and -1 nearest neighbor differences. The 2 degrees of freedom are peculiar, that one of them goes forward, the other one goes backward, and that has to do with the particle-antiparticle symmetry, or actually chirality, which appears in the Dirac equation. There are 2 different modes, one going forward and one going backward, and can easily construct random walk in terms of now this exponentiated matrices. Some of them will have movement forward, some of them will have movement backward, and the result actually looks quite different than what is well known in Brownian motion, particularly people who have not seen these things before. There is a big surprise. And the classical random walk is well known. It produces this so-called Gaussian distribution around the starting point. You go back and forth, it's a Brownian motion. The probability distribution is this Gaussian, and you can work out the average distance, which rather the width of the Gaussian, it grows as a square root of time. On the other hand, the Dirac equation distribution comes out with this peculiar structure. It is double peaked, one peak going forward in time, the other one going backward in time, and in between there is a more or less a flat region. If you try to evaluate the width of this distribution, it's proportional to time. Here it is, well, the expectation value of x square is proportional to time. Here is the expectation value of n square, it's a discrete version, is proportional to t square. So this describes a distribution which spreads in time linearly. That was the purpose of using this Dirac equation, and these two particular peaks correspond to opposite chiralities, or related to the fact that there is a particle mode and there is a antiparticle mode, and this feature can now be used to be an ingredient of this random walk algorithm buried inside some solution of a problem. It will produce a quadratic speed up in terms of what are known as hitting times, how fast you can go from one place to another, and how fast the distributions are going to spread. Okay, this is some amount of mathematics which one can use to formulate the whole question in a much more detail in arbitrary number of dimensions. I just showed the one-dimensional examples, and there this matrices alpha and beta can be reduced to certain kind of phase factors, depends on the position +1 and -1, and that can describe the whole process much more easily. Instead of trying to use an extra degree of freedom, it's a matter of choice. I will not go into too much detail about it, but the evolution equation just behaves like this, that the wave function at time t is this random walk operator iterated for certain number of times and operating on the whatever the wave function is at time equal to 0. There is a matrix which describes what this W is in terms of these various Hamiltonians exponentiated for a certain time. And the geometry which remains useful in describing this doubling of the positive and the negative chirality modes is in the graph theory can be embedded in something which is known as a bipartite decomposition. Certain graphs have this particular property that it can be broken into two disjoint parts, so that I have called them even and odd. So the neighbors of all the even points are the odd points, and neighbors of all the odd points are the even points. It's quite trivial to do it for a cubic, hypercubic lattice as illustrated, but it can be done for many other parts also. And the Dirac operator's symmetry corresponds to shuffling between these odd and even indices. That is again a matter of detail. I just want to illustrate that it can be done in arbitrary number of dimensions as well. I can skip this mathematical detail, it doesn't tell you too much, unless you want to deal with actual problems. I will only describe the kind of generic behavior. The walks basically spreads linearly in time, and its speed is basically becomes a measure of mixing behavior or hitting probability in these diffusion processes. If you have a lattice of some n points, then this will cover the d-dimensional lattice in order n raised to 1 by d time. It can't be arbitrary, the number of dimensions is limited, that well, at least 2 points in each direction have to be there. So there is an upper limit, but that's kind of trivial. The important fact which is buried inside this behavior is this quantum walk, though it has been called random, it is a much more a smooth process. It could not have been smooth, then this linear spread in time will not work. If it had been a zigzag, then you will waste time going back and forth and it will not spread as fast. So if it is going to spread linearly in time, that means these zigzag contributions of the walks are suppressed. And there are various things which go with it, that it hardly ever comes back to a starting point. It can even escape from a finite domain, and this kind of features are absent in the classical Brownian motion language, that the walk will always return to its starting point. It has trouble going outside a finite region. Those things are completely different than in this particular quantum process. And there is still one more thing which one can add to the Hamiltonian, and that is the behavior of the mass term. It helps in some sense to regularize the infrared divergences which appear in this random walk problems for small number of dimensions. Now, I am going to use this random walk process in combination with Grover's algorithm, and Grover used a particular diffusion operator in his algorithm, which was actually much different than the classical diffusion operator. It actually connected any particular site to any other site in one step, and that can be interpreted as the number of dimensions going to infinity. So everything is neighbor of everything else, and basically the number of neighbors increase with dimensionality, and you make it as large as possible, then you will have an operator which basically goes from one site to another site very fast. And that is yet another diffusion operator. It's not this local random walk operator, but it can be interpreted in this particular way. So this is only for the purpose of analogy. It is not a rigorous mathematical statement. One more thing I want to say is this Dirac operator appears in relativistic theories in standard physics textbooks, and so one can ask, even if I construct a mathematics, can I realize it in terms of particular physical hardware anywhere or not? And that has again a interesting answer, that to realize the Dirac operator in a physical system, one doesn't have to make it go at a speed of light. As long as you have an effective theory which obeys the linear dispersion relation, the Dirac operator will be built in. The only thing is the slope of the dispersion relation will be much smaller than the speed of light in say some solid state material. The most recent surprise in this structure is the example of graphene. It turns out that the dispersion relation obeyed by electrons in graphene is linear, and it follows Dirac equation. It's not speed of light, it's a finite speed, and many of the features which were completely left in the domain of relativistic dynamics, like he mentioned Klein's paradox or pair creation out of the vacuum as an instability, those features now can be experimentally demonstrated in graphene. It has been done. So it's no more a theoretical conjectures, because you don't have really relativistic systems that easily you automatically land up in quantum field theory, but now you have condensed matter systems which demonstrate this relativistic phenomena rather easily. Okay. So I am going to use this random walk to describe a particular problem which is known as spatial search. And The general search problem is basically you are given a database, you want to find a particular item from it, and the distinguishing characteristic that the item has to have certain specific properties. So, depending on that particular properties, you can do some trial and error until you arrive at the right answer, but this problem can be given different variations, and one of the variation which is what the spatial search is, that the database is distributed over many different physical locations. And so, the label of various items are not necessarily in internal space which can be accessed immediately, but they are spread out over a certain amount of space. And then the fact that the physical interactions are always local means that while you are trying to move from one item to another during the search process, you can only go from one object to its neighbor. You can't jump from one place to another place very fast. First you have to go through the intermediate places, and this restriction basically defines what is now the spatial search problem, that yes, you have specified given a database, specified the properties which distinguish an item, but during the search process you can't have arbitrary diffusion, you can only have nearest neighbor movement. Okay? And the problem depends on what exactly the geometry of all these sites is, how they are connected with each other, and typically these things are described in terms of a certain graph. So, each location is one particular point on the graph, then what are its neighbors, etc. And this kind of situations can arise in many applications. One particular interesting application which I want to point out, and that is because Love Grover likes it and he is not here to talk about it, is something which appeared kind of by accident while studying the photosynthesis process going on inside this simple objects called purple bacteria. And the photosynthesis occurs is a light harvesting process over a certain region. The photon falls on the many of these chlorophyll pigments, and the energy of the photon has to be then harvested and directed towards a particular center where the chemical synthesis, or whether combination of carbon dioxide and water into glucose has to take place. The job is how do you direct this photon energy, which could be anywhere, to this one particular process. And that has to clearly go through this nearest neighbor route, because you can't just transport the energy absorbed from a photon in one location to another in one step. It has to go to its neighbor and then move so on and so forth. And what was discovered by Professor Fleming's group at Berkeley was that during this transport, there are wave-like quantum coherent oscillations. This was not expected, they just observed the phenomena, and they were rather surprised by it. The phenomena lasts for about, or rather at least a picosecond durations. They are coherent oscillations because they did a detailed two-dimensional electron spectroscopy to measure the off-diagonal elements of the density matrix, and they could see these things. So, the process of how this thing is transferred from one location to another is not just classical hopping. It is a wave-like coherent motion, and the question is, well, first thing is, can we understand this process in terms of making a model? And if you want to make a model, you have to make a wave dynamics model of this diffusion process, which will be based on this random walk and spatial search kind of ideas. And once you have a model, you have to ask a question is whether this gives any particular advantage to anything occurring by just simple classical hopping. And if there is an advantage, then certainly quantum mechanics has given you a better algorithm than a classical process would. And in trying to study the geometry of this particular pigment protein complex, and how many components. It has 7 identical components, which are these chlorophyll molecules, and they communicate with this protein structure inside it using particular vibrational modes, which is how these oscillations propagate. It's an interesting problem. This result came out last year. I was hoping some biologists would make a detailed model, but so far nobody has done anything about it, and it's certainly a very interesting topic to explore. So anyway, that is an interesting possible application. What I am going to describe is give the results of my numerical simulations in a particular context where this lattice of various sites I have just taken to be an ordinary hypercube, and constructed algorithm for spatial search based on the thinking which Grover used himself many years ago to describe this as a search algorithm. And the strategy is to use a Hamiltonian. The kinetic part of the Hamiltonian I am going to use as just a Dirac operator, and its job is to diffuse the wave function all over the lattice, and there will be a potential part in the Hamiltonian. Its job is to attract the wave functions towards the marked site. And then if you use the total Hamiltonian, its job is to start out with some distribution and concentrate the amplitude identified by the potential. The way Grover used these two same terms, kinetic part and potential part, are his famous two inversion operators, which are written as the exponential of either the kinetic part or the potential part, and the potential part is mapped onto this so-called oracle, which focuses the amplitude towards one particular site, and the kinetic part is used as a diffusion which just tries to spread it out all over the lattice, and it's completely blind to where the walk should finally evolve to. And the diffusion operator which Grover used has a maximal connectivity, everything was connected to everything else, and that can be replaced by this nearest neighbor connectivity of random walk, and see what kind of algorithm comes out. So the evolution equation will just look like this. There is a starting state that it has to go to this final state, and it alternates these two particular processes. One of them comes from the potential energy, the other comes from the kinetic energy, and you combine the two to give a total evolution under the Hamiltonian. This is the so-called Trotter formula, which allows you to combine different parts of Hamiltonian to give the total evolution. Now, there are various criterion, and one can choose parameters to optimize this particular operator. This is a W to the power, and R is the potential energy part. What Grover discovered that the best answers for these things were all reflection operators or inversion operators, and that constraint has to do with unitarity of the particular process. What you are trying to do is get the maximum effect out of these physical properties of what the potential will do or what the kinetic part will do, and unitarity means that the movement will be constrained to be on a certain circle. If you want to get the largest possible movement on a circle, all you can do is from a starting point you can go into diametrically opposite location. If you try to go anything further, you will come back closer to yourself, and that going to the diametrically opposite location becomes an inversion operator or a reflection operator in Grover's algorithm. The same logic can be applied to this particular random walk system also, that one of the operator, the potential part, I am not going to use anything different, it is just the oracle, and it will be mapped onto its reflection process. But this random walk also I am going to maximize the spread, saying that it should become similar to an inversion operator, and that means this particular phase of this operator should come out close to pi and that can be done by in the exponential process. In the continuous time limit, it just means that the T1, which is the power over here, combined with the angle of rotation, which is comes out as a parameter, it should come close to pi. And numerically, this statement does get verified that you can play around with the parameters in a certain range, and you find that the maximum efficiency is obtained by some particular combination of the parameters which satisfy this particular condition. Another feature which comes out to be little useful in understanding, that you can construct a general operator, which is what I have called for a random walk, oracle multiplied by the diffusion operator, but it can be rewritten exactly in terms of two factors. One of the factors is the operator which Grover is used, and another operator is this simple diagonal matrix. And what turns out to be the case, that the diagonal matrix has one of the entries equal to 1, but the other number is slightly less than 1. And that has the consequence that during this particular evolution, the geometry in the Hilbert space is such that the diffusion does not remain restricted to only a two-dimensional subspace. If you have studied Glover's algorithm, you would know that the evolution there is completely within two-dimensional subspace, even when the total system has n dimensions. Here, it turns out that there is certain part of the amplitude which goes outside the two-dimensional subspace, and that is actually in some sense a waste, in the sense that the closest evolution will be you start from some stage and you end with the target place, and the two-dimensional system will give the so-called geodesic describing the walk. That part is slightly modified because there is a certain loss. This number is less than 1, means you go off in a perpendicular direction, and the optimization of the walk in some sense corresponds to making this number as close to 1 as possible, so that the loss is minimized. It never happens exactly, and which means that when you finally detect the target state by making a measurement, you get the correct answer only with some finite probability. The probability is not equal to 1. Okay. There are certain other features which are easy to understand in this spatial search problem, and that has to do with little bit with the language which is used in study of critical phenomena in statistical mechanics, and that arises because there are two conflicting parts of the dynamics. One is the reflection operator corresponding to diffusion, which spreads out the walk in a certain way, and another is the attraction towards the target state. And in the algorithm, they have different constraints which they have to match. The diffusion has to match that if you want to find an item in the database, you must have at least the capacity to go and visit every possible site, because if the marked site is in some region which you are not going to visit, then you will never reach that. So you have to always reach that particular site, and which means that the algorithm with this constraint of nearest neighbor walk must be of the order of n raised to 1 by d. It is just an extent of the lattice. On the other hand, there is a unitarity constraint which Grover found in his algorithm, which means that even if you can visit every site, you cannot find the target in steps which are smaller than square root of n, and so the total algorithm is has a lower bound which is both n raised to 1 by d and square root of n. The dynamics of these two things are different, and the two dynamics actually cross when the dimensionality of the system equal to 2. Now, in the language of critical phenomena, that corresponds to a borderline case, and the behavior of the algorithm depends on which side of the borderline you are. If it is dimension is just equal to 1, then the first factor dominates and the search speed is no better than the classical search, which turns out to be just order n. You can't do anything better even though the walk spreads faster. If the dimension is bigger than 2, then this becomes irrelevant, and you get the behavior which is dominated by square root of n, and indeed the algorithm is limited by the oracle calls, which are square root of order n, square root of n. In D equal to 2, something funny happens because these two things behave the same way, and again statistical mechanics has many examples of what can happen in such critical cases, that in addition to getting these powers, you get new critical exponential which all involve logarithm of n factors. So, you do not get square root of n terms, but corrections coming from extra logarithmic powers. It is connected with various kind of arguments. One of them is that this is a operator which in statistical mechanics or field theory will be described by a propagator. In two dimension, it will have this structure d2k by k square, and this integral is logarithmically divergent. And when that happens, you have certain extra penalty in terms of log n corrections to this square root process. There are certain tricks one can play with. In particular, this singularity can be governed by adding a finite mass. So, k square become k square plus m square, and so one can try to minimize these log n factors, but I will not go into too much details. Let me just show some graphs because I did the numerical simulations. These graphs have plotted two things as a function of the number of sites on the lattice. One is the probability of reaching the finite states, and the second is the number of oracle calls required to reach the target states. The dark line is the behavior in D equal to 3, where the probability is essentially constant, and this one is square root of n, and the two-dimensional case is this dashed line, which shows extra corrections coming in from log factors. In particular, this goes to 0 and this gets delayed by certain extra times, and the numerical simulations gave something better than that, that you can actually make fits to these various factors and determine the coefficients in front. So, these are just some number, but it basically tell you what is the final state probability. It keeps on falling into dimension, and this is the number of oracle calls, which also has a log n factors. On the other hand, for D equal to 3, this is constant, there's some number, and this is square root of n. And one particular thing which is interesting in terms of quantifying the efficiency of this algorithm is that we could do simulations as a function of D going up to larger and larger values. We went up to D equal to 9. And what turned out to be true is that the efficiency is measured by this particular number, which is the generalization used in extension of Grover's algorithm, which is known as a amplitude amplification. And so, what you have to do is you have to take this behavior of number of oracle calls and divide by the square root of this particular probability, and that number surprisingly turns out to be about 0.86, more or less independent of the dimensionality of the system. And this number is not very different from what Grover got in his so-called infinite dimensional limit. The number is pi by 4. And so, this algorithm in this small number of dimension and Grover's algorithm in this same language will be called a mean field theory approximation kind of thing. They are not very far from each other. In some sense, for this particular problem, D equal to 3 geometry is not very far from d equal to infinity. And that's a important signature of the efficiency of this random walks, that you have to go to maybe d equal to 3, but after that you are as good as you can get in any particular search process. Thank you.